Here we go! All right, everybody. It is episode 101. We have made it through 100 episodes of the E2KG network. I am already talking over the top, and I have not done the countdown, so we'll see if this gets counted on our show here, but we're just going to keep rolling with it. And eventually, when Agasicles does our countdown, we'll see. So if you're joining us, welcome. If this never makes it on, it's too bad for me. So, anyhow, so we are here. This is E2KG, and we're gonna.
You lucked out. You went early at your own risk, but I think it'll be okay.
See,
there's many a night where it wouldn't have been okay.
So I say, okay. So here I did this not intentionally because I really honestly forgot about the countdown. But at the same time, over the last couple of times, I've been watching these episodes, and there's a lot of dead air in the beginning. So I'm jumping the gun a little bit, getting us early, and this is what happens when we hit 100. Is we start to play fast and loose with our rules. So we made it a little bit over the top here, and Stallone is going to arm wrestle me down, and we're going to keep on going. So this is episode 101 of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. We are here. This is our GX show for the week of July 2nd, actually the first week of July. And really, as the GX shows, right, we alternate on E2KG here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast every other week. We've got a gamer experience show where we go through our playlist. And then we do our deep dive episodes as we dig into that week's news and other happenings. So we have survived E3. We have survived our 100th episode with a little bit of special guests. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and go back to last week's episode and check that out. It's a great show. But we are here tonight, or at least I am, and joining me is Swiss. How are you, Swissguard?
Doing really well. Looking forward to some Independence Day festivities and some additional gaming time since I get a couple of days off, so that'll be good.
Nice. Excellent. So, and joining us, as you heard, also on the mics and running the boards is Agasicles Stamus. He is here, but he is working and getting some other stuff done behind the scenes as I goof some things up for him by starting early. So we're this next 100 episodes is running off to a great start already. Agasicles, you are back and your green screen is behind you. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing good. Yeah, the green screen is just stored there. It is not part of the show. It is actually from where I had it in my most recent live streams that I've been doing to Twitch. So,
nice. Well, we will make sure we cover those tonight on our GX show. But first, let's go ahead and talk about our Pickz Playz assignment. So 2 weeks ago, we had our assignment. Oh, and the assignment was a little history class for us all, right? We had a little bit of going back to some historical games that celebrate our past. It actually ties out nicely, as you just said, Swiss, with Independence Day here in America. So the prompt here was related to the Humankind Odyssey, which is a PC game coming out at the end of August. There was a release date announced, and then we've got a console release coming around the holiday time as well. So our assignment was to go back, look back through, or at least pick a game that celebrated humanity's past. And I guess, I want to start with you because the rest of us have not necessarily the most recent of games, and although we're going to kind of click this back in chronological order, so I want to start with you because you've got the most recent here with Total War 3 Kingdoms. And as we talked about last week, this is a game that showed up on May's NPDs being a PC exclusive, and it hit the top 5. So how's your experience been with it? Have you had a chance to dive in, play a little bit, figure out some of the systems, some of the... Again, this is in the kind of Romance of the Three Kingdoms period of time. Is that correct?
Yes. Although it's been many eons since I took my ancient Asian history course, so I don't keep all this stuff straight. But but yeah, it's at the time of the Chinese Empire where there was a fragmentation of the dynastic powers, and there was a lot of warlord fighting. Essentially, the kingdom had decomposed into numerous warring factions, not led by any one ruler. There were alliances and betrayals, and so on and so forth. And this game takes place at that time. There is a story-driven campaign, and I guess that was the big buzz about this game. I think we may have mentioned last show, to the point where it kind of, in my mind, kind of muddied the waters on what this game was. There were some things that were said by EA marketing and maybe creative directors when the game was announced, I think caused a lot of people to think that the game was
by EA, or this is a
I'm sorry,
Sega game, right?
Yeah, Creative Assembly and
Okay.
Creative Assembly. Said by the development team and the creative director and maybe some of the marketing folks that made it seem almost like the game was kind of episodic and different starkly from the most recent run of the Total War campaign. And that it was tightly wrapped around this notion of a story. There were some things that were said, I remember, in the initial press that came out that talked about these slices and segments and recreation of very specific historical battles, and that was more of the primary thrust of the single player campaign. All of it made it sound like it didn't include what has historically become a very popular Conquer the World campaign that is played out in a turn-based system, and then once troops engage each other on the strategic map, then you are thrown into the RTS kind of map. And it's actually even more tactical than RTS, because when those battles occur, there's no notion of like resource gathering or harvesting or anything of that nature. So I actually now, and then I know that there was a point probably midway between when the initial announcement was made and the game released, that I believe it was the creative director who was out on Twitter and Reddit and other social media places trying to make it very clear that no, this game does include like the historical, I don't mean historical, but the classic trappings of previous installations of the Total War series, in that it would have that Conquer the World campaign, and notably so, and you know, to the game's benefit, it didn't release in an entire muddle of confusion. I'd really like to hear some data or some telemetry on how many people are playing the more, in my mind, classic, that Total War Rome kind of presentation, versus how many people are playing the scenario-based, story-based single-player campaign.
So do you think that split between them, or the messaging was a matter of, there's been multiple iterations over Total War, right? We talked about this a little bit last week. Or, you know, they've run their history. They took a stint in Warhammer, and now they've come back to world history. Do you think this is a way for them to add another component in, or is it, given some of the, as you said, right, both the history around this time period and also the literature around this time period, is it a way for them to take advantage of some of those stories and not quite folklore, but some of the grander, kind of broader strokes within some of the legends around this period?
Well, the main thing, I guess, is that it was an opportunity for them to inject some romanticism or romanticism around the campaign. And kind of specifically what they talked about in the original press releases was that this was an opportunity for them to focus on a lot of the historical figures and characters of the time period, and less so on the political systems and the war units and things of that nature. And again, there was this mention of like, you're going to get the chance to play like these specific historical scenarios and these specific war campaigns and battles. And I also remember that it seemed like there was this illusion that things would be shorter and tighter and more focused, and it wouldn't be the Conquer the World campaign it's a very large. It can arguably, and at some point in your campaign, it becomes very unwieldy, right? You wind up becoming in control of so much territory that micromanaging that can kind of become a chore. And maybe you lose a little bit of touch and contact with the notion of your empire. And maybe there's a problem with like hewing together what should be an end game for that type of game. But yeah, I mean, essentially this was supposed to be an opportunity for you to really get more intimately familiar with some of the characters. But also what was mentioned was, that they wanted to take the opportunity to focus on personalities who were actually significant contributors to the strategy and the politics of the time, but weren't focused so much in history. So if you put it kind of in a Civil War aspect, right, there's lots of these little tiny battles that made up these critical events in the Civil War that nobody really talks about because they weren't Gettysburg or some of these other major battle areas. So it was supposed to be an opportunity for them to do that. Maybe that's in there. I don't know. I haven't bothered to play the single player campaign because I bought the game because I love that turn-based conquer the world approach. And then, then the tactical situations being no holds barred don't dictate to me like what my limitations and constraints are. Let me pick what tactical units I want to deploy and fight the fight, how I so choose. And that's what that Conquer the World campaign offers you. And so in that aspect, Total War, this iteration of Total War is kind of the same that Total War has always been. The only downside that I've had in the initial goings is that they have moved some things around in terms of menus and how things are presented. In particular, one of the things that particularly flummoxed me is the town progression and improvement menu, the construction menu, is abstracted now. So it talks about kind of capabilities, not build a granary, right? Build 5 housing units to allow for population expanse. It talks about things at a more topical level. And so I spent a lot of time while I was, taking over my first cities going like, where the heck is the construction menu? And thinking that it was like some weird thing where it just didn't give me access to that in the first few, in the first 30 turns or whatever of the campaign. But it turns out it was there the whole time. It's just abstracted in a way that for me, leaning on past design paradigms, it kind of just caused me to miss it.
So how much of that, the design paradigm and the menu layout or just the systems within the game, how much of your understanding of this and your enjoyment of this has come from your past knowledge, your past experience, or how much are you feeling like, somebody else who's lapsed as a Total War player could jump in and play this, or somebody who's interested in the time period
Right.
may enjoy something, even if they're not a Total War aficionado?
I think they would still get it because the one thing that I refused to do was sit through the naggy, chatty, stinking AI commentator in the upper right-hand corner of the screen that like speaks. I mean, it's like a Metal Gear Solid like cutscene, right? I mean, for like every little thing. And I just kind of power drilled through that stuff. So someone else who's coming to it for the first time, if they allow that experience to unfold, and admittedly, the first couple times that I played Rome Total War, I sat there and listened through that until I had churned through enough turns of the game that I had kind of heard each of those things once or twice and just didn't need to hear them anymore. But I will also admit I have this weird paranoia that sometimes prevents me from turning that off entirely out of this fear that like I'm going to hit the one mechanic that I don't get and I actually need the tutorial. So yeah, I think somebody new coming to it will definitely get exposed to that tutor and will pick up on parts of the game that they don't get right away. So yeah, I don't think any newcomers will have a hard time picking it up. People who have played Total War, but like you said, like me, who have lapsed, might go through the same thing I did, where just you're looking for, like, I'm literally looking for like the exact same thing that I would have seen in a Rome Total War menu, and in some cases in Total War 3 Kingdoms, that design element is just not present within the UI.
So a final question or thoughts here from your perspective. So this was part of the assignment. But are you going to keep going with it? Has it hooked you enough? Has it, as a lapsed player who enjoyed previous games, do you feel like it's pulled you back in a meaningful way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is kind of these are kind of one of my staple games. It's kind of my erector set where I'm not compelled to like ever finish this game, but it can sit in my backlog like forever, and I can periodically always go back to it. I mean, I just played, a 2 weeks I think of Rome Total War last year and live streamed that. One of the games that you're going to mention, Rise of Nations, same thing. I went back to that, and sometimes I will go back to those things for 2 weeks at a time, and just kind of build, take over larger parts of civilizations, enjoy, a 2 week sit down of a brief campaign, kind of writing that fiction in my head of what's really going on, outside the map, and totally have a blast with that kind of 4X game design. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, you've given us lots of hooks for transition, whether it's the game you name dropped for me or the fact that you're talking about some 4X pieces. And we've got Swiss, who's been playing a Paradox game. So yes, I will. I'm going to mush those together and say, yes, I was playing Rise of Nations, and I picked that up because of Game Pass. But Swiss, you picked up another game on Game Pass, which is a little more recent than Rise of Nations. So again, both of these are Game Pass for PC. It's been kind of interesting and fun to explore and see the differences in that catalog because of the PC nature, like Rise of Nations. Imperator Rome is the game that you picked up, and so this is by Paradox. This is in the Europa Universalis kind of mindset here. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've never played any of these Paradox grand strategy games, so the baggage that I took in was Civilization and back in the day playing Rome Total War. And initially I think that hampered me. I've been playing it, for a couple hours the last 3 days. And it's definitely like a AA title. So there's not the I would say the nice polish that a Civilization has, with the world leaders have a 3D, model, and the interactions and the jokes. There's not that level, but it also has, like, from the Total War like campaign, like you have your map and the goal is to take over as many provinces as you can. I guess that's like really the only point to it. But they don't have the grand, military battles that you have in a Total War. Like, that's all completely eschewed, and all the battles are simulated. The game, my first reaction was a little negative, but it's starting to grow on me. I feel like I'm just now kind of starting to scratch the surface of what it is. And again, this goes to me never having played one of these grand strategy games before, because there is so much here. I mean, you have, first of all, like, the map is like psycho detailed. Like, I mean, you have, it's set in 450 after the founding of Rome, so they don't use the Gregorian calendar. They use like the Roman dating system, and so I think that's like in the 300s BC. So you have Carthage and all the little provinces and whatnot around. All the random Celtic tribes are up in Britain, and it's just, some of they'll be like, such and such, Icenia or whatever wants to open a trade with you, and it's like, I have no idea where that is or who that is or anything like that. So at the historical level, yeah, they go deep. Okay, so you have the map, your province or your empire or whatever you want to call it. Like, you can set government systems, you can set for individual provinces within your empire, you can set different like focuses, like focus on trade, focus on autonomy for that province. There may be civil unrest if you're I'm Carthage, so a lot of my population is Canaanite, they say. But if you have another province that's like Hebrew, there might be there could be friction that develops between them. Religions, so all sorts of trade that you have to worry about. They have the whole family structure that was in Total War, right? So every government, I played as a Celtic. I played as the Romans in a tutorial, and I played the Carthaginians. The governments are all structured differently, but you'll have your primary person, and you might have different offices, and you can pick people to go in those offices. So they may grant you benefits or whatnot. If there's a special family in your empire that doesn't have any prominence, there's no they're not in the government at all, and they don't have a prestigious army generalship, because you can put a general in each of your armies and it gives boosts to the armies and the navies. They might get discontented, and then they might start to foment rebellions or cause sticky situations. So it's just, I haven't even gotten to you can have an omen where there's a religion where you can dedicate yourself to Mars or Artemis or Jupiter, whoever, and gain a benefit from there. So it was overwhelming, having not seen this and coming in. None of these systems were completely foreign to me, because I've played Civilization, I've played Total War, but there's no turns. You have a clock and you just tick it on, and then it's April 1st, April 2nd, April 3rd, April 4th, and it's just going. And at first that was kind of alarming me, and I was rushing myself, and it's easy to get yourself killed if you rush into battle without being prepared and without having correctly scouted it out. And the intricacies of alliances, I saw this one little municipality, and I'm like, well, I'll just take that with, he's got 2,000 troops and I've got 6,000. And I went in there, and of course he's bordering this other protectorate, and that dude swooped in with 18,000 troops and just wiped me out. So it's just a lot of little things I'm kind of learning the hard way. But each time I'm being drawn in a little bit more, and trying to play it a little bit more intelligently, and I'm starting to see how the game appeals to a certain demographic of gamer, why it would be fun. I think the challenge is you'd really have to dedicate some time to it, because I have to wait for my treasury to get big enough for me to recruit more cohorts, and you can't just go building new buildings willy-nilly. It's you have to have the finances to do it, and
so
I can't go ahead.
So I may have missed it, but so what, because this isn't I think you mentioned this isn't one of your staple developers that you normally consume their games, and is this from the same group of people that do Caesar and Pharaoh?
I'm not sure about those games. They did you as DB said, they Europa Universalis, they did Crusader Kings.
Okay. Is it do they also do Anno, or is that a different developer?
That's Ubisoft. That's different.
Okay. So
and this is not Caesar as well. Caesar's a different studio.
Okay. But there's this, I'll still throw this in the bucket, right? The whole Anno, Europa Universalis, Caesar, Pharaoh, they're in this weird, mildly off-axis strategy pocket of things that are just kind of different. That, as you mentioned, their focus is, Total War, and you've played Rome Total War. Total War kind of squarely puts an emphasis on, grand maneuver strategy, high resource and finance management, political alliances, and combat. There's four kind of core staples that you can readily identify. And then there's some minor things like religion, and even Three Kingdoms does a little bit of they call them reforms, right? So you can issue these edicts within the Chinese Empire that might kind of create like a slightly different social dynamic, but they're not part of the core. And the core is readily identifiable, and you can even skirt managing any of the some kind of ancillary stuff. But these games, one of those things is there's a lot of what we might normally think of as ancillary and not as important, and maybe admittedly not as fun, that you can't skirt. They like kind of deliberately contrive ways to put it right in front of your face and force you to manage it. So I mean, given games like that, right? Or is this something you're gonna stick with, or is this?
I've started this Carthaginian campaign, and I just like right before the show started, I took out like half of Sicily.
Okay.
So there's only like a few like minor players left on Sicily. So I've had a little bit of success there. I can see like there's some other province that's starting to foment something. I might continue with this campaign and see where it takes me. But after that, I didn't invest a lot of money in the game because it's through Game Pass. I'm probably not going to like make this a staple of my rotation, as you said, because like it feels like all that stuff's there, but like it's kind of hard for me to like really wrap my head around, okay, I need to do this in this city, and if I build this in this city, with Civ 6 or something, or with Civilization, for example. I haven't played Civ 6 yet, but for Civilization, like I know it's like, okay, I get iron, I can build a road to the iron, and it's in my trade network, I can do stuff. They kind of have that where I can't, in a province, for example, build horse-mounted units unless I have access to horses. Well, okay, there's not such really thing as like seeing horses on a map. It's like everybody's already spread out, so I need to trade with somebody. Well, I can't just open up a random trade thing. It's like I got to make sure that they like me, and and when there's like well over 100 ancient names, I don't know who's where or what. I have no idea. I have no historical context of whether they like me or not. I know Rome and Carthage don't like each other.
Right.
But
this is what I think I was getting at. Like the thing that makes these things different is Civ 6 and Rome and the Total. Those things are things where you can kind of dig into those systems if you want to, but you don't have to. The difference with these games, Caesar, Pharaoh, Anno, Europe, I feel like they force you to dive deep on things that you might otherwise not like elect to go down a particular rabbit hole.
Well, I've already found myself in this Carthaginian campaign trying to figure out, how do I get more trade routes? Because I see like when I get an offer for trade, it's like, okay, I get 0.76 gold per month from this trade. And it's like, whatever, I'm accepting every trade request that I get, but I want to invoke some myself. Well, you can only do that if you have 25 civic, whatever the unit of thing is. That builds up every month, so I got to wait for that. But then some cities, it's like all my cities' trade routes are filled. How do I get more trade routes? Oh, wait, I got to change the city's particular stance. So, okay, you're no longer autonomous. You need to focus on trade, even if it causes more civil unrest. But if I get more trade, then I can boost my income. Trade for somebody for horses. I can get horses on Sicily, which will help me to be able to build horse-mounted units, which I can use against their hoplite or whatever, heavy infantry. Right. So it's just like I'm learning all this on the fly, and it's like, oh, okay, it's starting to come together a little bit. But like you said, I look at Rome Total War, and I look at like a Civilization, and I even look at a battle. Well, and BattleTech's a completely different animal. But there's a lot in BattleTech. You don't really have to go nuts with like the hyper management of your lance, but it's there if you want it. It's mostly focused on the tactics, and all those feel like more, like you said, maneuver tactics, and this just feels like very much a crazy, like somebody went like super nuts with those tabletop games,
right,
and it's just is like. Nobody said no, and there's too many systems. I can see the appeal for somebody that's like into that.
Yep.
But as you said, it's very much a niche. But
and
I paid $1 for Game Pass for this month, so
Right, and I think as we talk about like these new gamers that we are becoming cognizant of their existence, I think there's a group of people, right? I think there are like I mean, if you think about like maybe some of like our dads or some other kids' dads who like I know like dads or parents or people that I hear who are and I say dads, moms too, right? Who are like they just play Civ, right? I'm absolutely certain there's a group of people who like just play games like this, right? And the reason that's appealing to them is because they can super dumpster dive on those individual systems and spend hours and hours and hours and months of months deep diving on that one thing. And and again, it's like I think you nailed it. It's the type of people, and I'm not saying they're bad people. They're the type of people who would play a tabletop game. Like the people that we knew played like Warhammer, the tabletop game, and they like bought sets of miniatures and painted that but they were like super deep into those systems. So what's funny is that number one, I guess this wasn't necessarily intentionally meant to be a strategy episode, but I'm absolutely amazed that even the third member of the cast tonight played one of my favorite strategy games, which was Rise of Nations. So, but I don't know, DBQ, if you had any questions for Swiss about.
No, you had such a strong segue there. So I'll go ahead and take that. And but again, so Rise of Nations is also on PC Game Pass. It actually looks pretty nice. I played it in 1900, relatively high resolution. And it scales up pretty nicely. It is. I remember playing the demo back in 2002, 2003, kind of early 2000s, big huge games where we've got Rise of Nations, and so I'm glad that it's one of your favorite games, Agasicles, because it was a good reminder to me that I have always struggled on the management end of an RTS versus turn-based strategy. I really appreciated the systems. I liked it in terms of the number of layers. It felt deeper to me than like Age of Empires 2, Age of Empires 3, related to some of the civilization advances in terms of the civic and the science and military. There were some parallels there within my nomenclature of the Civilization series for advancing some of those, but then the kind of mechanics of an RTS in terms of queuing up your units, making sure you have the right combination of long range and short range, defensive and different types of units there, and kind of juggling all that together. Again, similar to Swiss, I can see and appreciate where people enjoy the game design of it, and I think it's a very solid game design. I struggled just kind of getting over my own shortcomings related to RTS, but again, it is a game where it's always been on my list of games that I have appreciated from afar, given that it had some pretty high critical acclaim, but I had never really sunk a lot of time into it or invested money into it, and so having it on PC Game Pass was a great way to play around with it, play with some of its systems. Whether or not I come back to it after this, it's certainly I was able to understand it and get in and feel like I was getting the ebb and flow of a game a whole lot faster than what Swiss was talking about. It certainly is a little more approachable. It has a number of different tutorial levels that set you up, and you can tailor those based on your kind of RTS knowledge, right? And so I think it has a nice onboarding ramp. So again, I'm mixed on it, but I know that is me in terms of game design and what it is. It's even being a 18-year-old game, it still holds up and was still fun to poke around in over the course of this past week.
And yeah, it's an 18-year-old game that has since been refreshed, right? So technically, this is the enhanced edition or extended edition or whatever, which actually just became available for sale on the Microsoft Store originally, like in the last 2 years. So it's almost kind of a remaster-ish kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's certainly, but I think that's its core mechanics are still pretty, still there. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah, it was, yes, because it's a repolish. It is definitely not. I mean, nobody went back and monkeyed with the innards of the game. So yeah, I mean, so since it only had but so much stick-to-itiveness for you, just wanted to mention a little bit about this game's pedigree. So this is Brian Reynolds, who was a longtime partner of Sid Meier, and heavily responsible for the design of Civilization 2 as well as Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. Brian Reynolds then eventually left and formed Big Huge Games, which did Rise of Nations as its initial property. And the big click of Rise of Nations way back in the early 2000s was that, and I don't know if you kind of were able to see it, but it invoked this thing of political boundaries for the territories that you held and the lands that you occupied in Rise of Nations. There were a couple of expansions, and funnily enough, the studio was eventually acquired by THQ. And then even more funnily, I don't know, whatever. One of the things that we have since talked about on the podcast in one incarnation, whether I don't remember if we were still Band of Gamers or E2KG, was that this studio, its employees then were eventually acquired by 38 Studios, who unfortunately their claim to fame, well, that's appropriate. The claim to flame was the development and release of Amalur. What was the subtitle on that? Amalur: The Reckoning?
Yeah, Kingdoms of Amalur: The Reckoning.
Yes.
Which was the EA published, this was the Kurt Schilling studio, the Rhode Island financed that shut down and had multiple lawsuits afterward.
Yep. So, but in the wake of their demise, they left a really great game behind, which is fortunately being maintained and sold on the Microsoft Marketplace.
Yeah, I can remember being aware of this game because of my kind of love for Alpha Centauri and Civ 2. When this game released, it was well reviewed at the time, and so it certainly holds up. And I think the political piece actually feels very similar to, in terms of those boundaries, it's things that Civ tried to do, in Civ 5 and 6, right? I mean, some of those are things that only later iterations of Civ would pick up.
Well, and to me, from an RTS perspective, this was part of a wave of games that released as the industry really evolved and iterated upon the classicist design that was Age of Empires. So Age of Empires was a thing that, for me as an RTS fan, never fully satisfied me. And the industry evolved that paradigm with Rise of Nations. God, there was another one, but Empire Earth was another big one that kind of was a variation on the same.
Yeah, that was
man. Empire Earth to me was the greatest historic RTS ever made. And then we got Empire Earth 2, obviously. There were further iterations of it in slightly different skins in terms of Homeworld and Homeworld 2. And I'm going to look this. There was a game that Activision published that was something that was an iteration of, again, upon this like historic evolution of mankind. And its big thing was it would allow you to zoom into the battlefield and take control of an actual hero on the battlefield, but then zoom back out to the RTS thing. So it's a very cool. I mean, the assignment was to play something that talked about the evolution of history, of mankind's history. But I like this thing that you selected because it's an important inflection point in the evolution of the games industry and games as a design within the RTS genre.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. It certainly is. I think it straddles that line. As a fan of turn-based strategy games, I can see where the resources are not the simple kind of StarCraft, Age of Empires, iron, wood. There's more nuance there, and there's more systems in play related to the actual civilization versus just having enough of X number of material to churn out Y number of units. So there are some nice kind of historic pieces there, while you can still kind of dive into the the RTS battling aspect of it. So again, it's a well-made game. It deserves its kind of historical place, and I hope that having it on Game Pass and people like Swiss that picked it Game Pass up for $1 find some things, have the ability to revisit some of those classics, and it gets, as we saw in the news this week, that Age of Empires 2 still pulls in 1 million players every month, right? So hopefully Rise of Nations can hold its audience and potentially find some new ones as well. So, gentlemen, I'm going to transition into our playlist unless you have anything else to talk about with either of our historical game assignments here. So let's go back, and we talked about the green screen at the beginning of the episode, Agasicles, and last night you were up on Facebook and other places streaming some Prince of Persia, the 2008. Again, as we're diving back into the mid-2000s in terms of games, you were playing the reboot Prince of Persia from Ubisoft on the PlayStation 3. So what caused you to go back and pick up a game that I've always really enjoyed its art style and some of its mechanics? I can see the lineage there with Assassin's Creed. So what caused you to go back and revisit this game?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Assassin's Creed. Yeah, this was just a totally random pick. I kept the PlayStation 3 around because there were games on that platform that I didn't feel like I'd spent enough time with when I, eventually got around to picking up my PlayStation 4. And so every once in a while I go back to it and kind of dig through the backlog. Like you mentioned, Prince of Persia, the 2008 kind of it's so hard to call it a reboot because I refer to it in my Go Live announcement more so as a singular waypoint along the evolution of the Prince of Persia franchise, because they did it this one time and then they went back to doing things that are more in the vein of the Prince of Persia, the time traveler kind of stuff. Yeah, so it was just a relatively random pick out of my backlog. What I found interesting about it in the revisit is you could see elements of it that, as you mentioned, evoke Assassin's Creed. You could see where that kind of DNA was kind of reflected. It reminds me of Uncharted in some ways in the wall scaling. Titanfall is evoked in it with the wall running, and Tomb Raider. So you can see elements that kind of picked up on design elements in terms of those titles that came before, but you can also see the groundwork being laid for future iterations of those titles that came after it. My overall feeling of the game is that in the first couple hours, it felt really good. I accomplished a lot, surprisingly so, because this is in this genre of game where a lot of times, if I sit down with it for a 2-hour block of time, I can often not actually get a lot done, and then I feel demoralized. I'm like, this is such a slog. But the first 2 hours, in this case, I kind of chugged through a bunch of, mini bosses and actual boss battles. Actually, it's kind of boss battle heavy, that you don't spend a lot of time fighting kind of just like general level henchmen. And that was enjoyable. I put it away, came back to it the next day. The next day, out of a 2-hour time block, I probably spent an hour and a half of that platforming and just trying to traverse around levels. And that was not enjoyable, particularly on a night when I was just tired. I had been up for a long time. Figuring out platforming puzzles is not something I do well when I am very sleepy. So and I was like, something feels like not right about like the pace and the pacing of this game. In an hour and a half, I experienced very little combat. And it wasn't an hour and a half spent of me just constantly like redoing things over and over. There's some inelegance in the control scheme as it's set, and some funkiness in the camera is a responsive design where which direction you go in a level is initially dependent upon which way the game thinks the camera is facing, because everything is relative to the camera angle. There are times when I can see that, like, the way you're looking at the camera, you push the analog stick left and you're expecting the thing to go in a certain direction, and it doesn't go in that direction, which tells me, well, the game thinks the camera is pointed in a slightly different angle than I perceive it as. So there's some inelegance in that type of design. And overall, last night, in an hour and a half time block, I hit like the 1 hour 30, maybe 1 hour 37 minute point, and I was like, I can't stay awake like doing this anymore, and I stopped and went and played like Dirt 3. So I may continue. I'm gonna continue playing some more with it, but I'll definitely be playing something that's more of a grindy game, before it or maybe after it. And I may only play it for like an hour. But as you mentioned, there's some beauty in the design. There's a little bit of collisioning where it feels kind of like Mirror's Edge, or in some ways like Assassin's Creed, where the game has this beautiful fluid movement and combat model that feels great when things get executed the way that you are imagining them like 3 seconds before they happen. But in those instances where you're imagining combat unfolding in a certain way 3 seconds before it happens, and you screw up a jump or run into a wall or do something that just looks very inelegant, that whole immersion is just entirely destroyed until you move on to the next scene. So it's been pretty cool revisiting it. It's a little, I'm a little torn because I could see the ragged edges where I'm like, this is not like, I don't know that this is a game that I'll finish, right? It's a game that I'll play. But so part of me feels like, man, it feels like this game should have gotten more accolades, and we should think about it more prominently through a historical lens. But then I hit these points of jank, and I'm like, oh, I can see why this game like was not like a 9.0 game, and maybe even arguably why Ubisoft didn't approach it as a sequel.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you were talking about Rise of Nations being an inflection point. I see this game as kind of in that transition period as well, right? It is that, I don't know if it's quite the inflection point, but I think you're completely right, where it is this transition out of the late PlayStation 2, early Xbox 360 era of 3D platform game design, and it's not quite into the kind of evolved Assassin's Creed, Black Flag, Uncharted 2 aspect of kind of mastering that movement, that fluidity and camera. So yes, I mean, I remember looking back on this multiple times over the last decade and thinking about where it does start laying some of that groundwork, but I think you're right, and the reviews at the time certainly lay that out, of there is some clunkiness to that ambition where it doesn't quite meet and succeed in those goals as well. So we've got one, you talked about jumping back into Prince of Persia on your PS3 because you've kept your PS3 up for some PS3 games that you wanted to revisit. Swiss, you revisited a PS3 game that was originally an exclusive, but now has come to PC and out on the Epic Store. And so you've made your way through Journey. You've talked about Journey a little bit on the last Gamer Experience show, but now you've completed it. How you feeling about it?
Pretty much the same way I felt before, unfortunately. It's pretty, like, it is interesting in terms of, like, there's a sense of whimsy's the wrong word, but because that implies a little bit too cheerful, but a dreamlike feeling when you're playing it. Just like it feels a little like you do feel like you're kind of in a different world a little bit, and just some of the way that they have like the carpets flying through like dolphins, and it just, yeah, I can get a sense that, okay, people kind of dig the style, but it didn't feel like a game to me. Like it just, like, I went through it. There are two scenes where there's an enemy that could hurt you, and okay, yeah, I feel a little tension. I don't want my scarf to get bitten, and that's it. And
but it's
for
the
all
experience. It's
the
an. I mean,
experience, but you
I
also
say that sarcastically, but I think that is
no,
what it's trying to be, though, too, right?
it's supposed to be an experience, but it was like, as you said, it was supposed to be an experience where you meet other people. And at the end, I had met one other person. I don't know if it was the same person I had met at the beginning of the game, but just listed one username at the end of the game that I had encountered. And I bumped into like another journeyer, like in 2 different levels. So for like a split second, and that was it. So I have no idea if that really affects the experience. I want to play a game. I want challenges. I want my intellect challenged, or my skill challenged, or just give me a good story or something. There needs to be more of a hook than dreamlike, to the mysterious mountain. And, perhaps the metaphors are just too subtle for me, but I bought into the hype, and I'm glad I only spent $5 on it, because it just didn't feel it's all sizzle and no steak. Let's put it that way.
I don't know that I've ever heard somebody be this down on Journey. It is an indie darling. It is a game that has taken multiple praise from lots of corners of the industry. And I'm not disagreeing with you. It is
I feel like
in some ways refreshing, or at least I love the game. It's my PlayStation icon. In terms of my PlayStation username, right? I mean, I say that from a place of I experienced it in a moment in a time. I've been able to revisit it on the PlayStation 4, but I respect what you're saying in terms of it. It didn't resonate in any meaningful way that you were hoping for.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't. It's technically competent. It's pretty. It's there's nothing in it where it's like I'm like, man, this is crap. It's not like they did a bad job. It was just like their goal and for the experience and my goal as a gamer are not in alignment. And I guess I'm glad I played it so I can see what the hype was about, but it's also like, it's not my cup of tea. I obviously am not one to play these, that game company. If they put more stuff out there, I'm probably going to give them a pass, because it's just like, hey, you guys just aren't making games for Swissguard.
So I'm going to jump to a game that I know was made for me and for other people who loved Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So
DB,
yeah.
can I second what? So I think this is you've mentioned before that this was a game of a certain era. I think the weird thing maybe is that, like you said, you rarely hear people speak badly about Journey. I think with Swiss's experience, we have a rare instance where a person who, I guess the people who would have spoken badly about Journey just didn't play Journey, right? Like we just steered away from it. This was also, the thing, and I know that lots of journalists, media journalists, gaming journalists didn't like this term, and it probably got thrown around too casually. Is this was a time where where indie games coming to PlayStation 3 were a thing. And a lot of those indie games were these things that we were calling walking around simulators. And there was Journey, and there were other games of that ilk in this era where kind of it was probably the first real time that we like frequently threw around this term, not a gamey game, where they were kind of experiences. And like you mentioned, like that experience, I think, could potentially arguably have been lost through time, where a re-release doesn't really work. It's very much art house, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I agree. I feel like, there's film critics, and at some point they're like, man, I don't want to keep reviewing like Michael Bay. I want to go and get something and by Stanley Kubrick, and if I praise this, it shows my intellectual chops as like a film critic or something. It's just like, look, I need something that's more than what I've been having, and I feel like maybe Journey for a lot of gaming journalists was that thing. It was like the hip thing to latch onto.
I'll offer a slightly different potential, possibility, because on a day where we talk about Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm right there with you, where I feel like there was this media aggrandizement of a thing that wasn't quite the thing that they said that it was. Same thing with Monster Hunter World, right, where I feel like the game was lauded for elements that didn't ring true for a broad category of gamers. But I think, again, in terms of the art house and a thing of a time, I think it was regarded as a certain thing, and it was lauded as a certain thing because it was at a time where that type of thing did not classically exist on consoles. And the fact that it was, this was in a time where the fact that a game like that was even being made available on a PlayStation console was just not a normal thing that was done. In an industry where typically things were, shrink wrapped in CD cases and couldn't be sold to gamers unless they were greenlit and distributed by a very large publisher. So I think a lot of those people experience Journey, in a way where, like, again, they were coming from an era where, like, you would not have normally gotten that kind of a thing on that console. So I'm sorry, I wanted to just interject the one thing, and we went on a little bit longer. So
I think that's good, and we've got some good stuff to talk about, because I agree with you. It was one of the kind of early walking simulators. It had a very specific art style. I also don't think that Journey ever proclaimed to be something more than it was, right? It's a couple hours experience at best. It was never really it's not like they were out there kind of trying to market it as a mechanics-based game. And again, that's not to say that your perspective is invalid. And I think that this is, in a time that we're talking about, being able to go back and appreciate a game like Prince of Persia and see where it's trying to do something, but where it stumbles, it is a little harder to do that potentially in Journey, because people have evolved that or have continued some of that, or some of the uniqueness of it, of being able to stumble into people or other players in that is not something that's readily available on a 8 years after release on a PC platform that it was not intended for originally, right? So it's good that you played it. It's also good that we can provide and have this discussion around kind of where we land on some of those things. So, any final thoughts on that, gentlemen? We're going to run late tonight, so we're going to kind of kick through a couple here relatively quickly. I'm going to talk about 2 games here and then bounce it back to you guys. So I've been playing Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. So this is the Igarashi Symphony of the Night game, and it is Symphony of the Night. I'm playing it on Xbox, so I have not experienced any of the Switch kind of frame rates and other hitches and glitches and performance issues. If you enjoyed Symphony of the Night and some of the GBA and DS games in terms of that Metroidvania, it is the game that helped coin that phrase. This is right there. The art style is very similar. The pipe organ brought me right back within the first few minutes. I felt like I was playing through Symphony of the Night. It controls well. It's a little, in some ways it feels maybe a little bit too similar. I guess I'm not quite far enough in to get enough abilities yet to know how much where it starts to feel a little more different, where it evolves. But it is certainly enjoyable, and it hits both the nostalgic pieces, but it also does a few new things with some of bringing in some of the area of sorrow kind of souls and shards that it brings in for different abilities. It seems to work really well. At least for me, it's hitting those right kind of nostalgic but also revamped nodes. And a game that didn't really hit those nostalgic and revamped modes for me was Crash Team Racing. So I played this both on Switch and Xbox, and I played it with my kids. In some ways, it is not as accessible as a kart racer because of the boost mechanic, where you've got to charge it with one shoulder button and trigger it with the other, so you're constantly kind of watching a meter. There are some visual cues within your wheels as well, but what I found is, as the more I focused on it, and eventually I got it, there's a rhythm there to it, but I spent more time looking at my meter, looking at my wheels, trying to get that, because it wasn't always consistent, than I did looking at the track ahead of me. And so I played it for a weekend, and I ended up going back to Sonic Team Racing as a kart race alternative to it. So there, I'm going to jump now to something that you both played over last weekend. You guys teamed up in some Destiny 2 encounters. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Agasicles, myself, and my wife, Jeff Force Vila, formed Fire Team, and we finally were able to, for Vila and I, to finish the initial campaign in the game, the Red War. So that was a lot of fun. We had a good time doing that, and coming on the heels of the announcement of Shadowkeep, then we did that and we played it. Destiny 2 is really starting to get revived in my household. My wife was actually disappointed that we're having the show tonight, because she was planning on playing it tonight. So we started the Curse of Osiris, and I put this in my list because I'm actually starting to really get into the lore. Like, we started the Curse of Osiris, and then you had Osiris the Guardian, and we're starting to learn a little bit about it, and I'm starting to see now, like, the wider Destiny world. And, you know, coming from somebody that never played the original Destiny, it's tickling my sci-fi fandom, to the point where I think they have, like, the Destiny Grimoire or something book.
Yes, I own the first one. The second one actually came up for pre-order just today, so nice timing.
Oh. I was looking at the first one, and I was trying to finagle getting that, because my son likes, like, you know, the Hyrule Storia type stuff. Get it for him, but it might be a little bit too lore heavy sci-fi for, you know.
Yeah, there's some parts of it that are pretty abstract that if you haven't played the actual game, there's not. Yeah. Unlike Hyrule Historia, where it treats it as a reference book, this is more of like a lore kind of. It's a little more lyrical. You know, these are the Grimoire cards that are just compiled and put with some artwork.
So I'll probably end up picking it up myself, but that was why I stuck it in my game log.
So, Agasicles, you and I have finished the Red War. We've gone back and played other things. Have you, outside of helping and shepherding someone through that final campaign, have you been back into Destiny, kind of ramping up for Shadowkeep as well?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is my time that I'm spending in Destiny is predominantly about, you know, leveling characters. So you know, when I get to that point where I have to make a choice between which ones I carry over, you know, they're positioned as well as they can be. But it's also just because I just, you know, it's one of my two, you know, recently identified grind games, right? This and the Division 2. It's just a thing that I always love coming back to. So plays beautifully on PC, but also plays well on Xbox and PlayStation. And you know, I don't have much more to say about it.
I mean, I think we've talked about Destiny a lot, and I'm sure we're going to keep talking about it as the year goes on as well. So, you know, I've been playing Destiny 2 a lot as well, and actually I've gotten back into trying to grind out a couple of guns before the season finishes out here, and Shadowkeep comes in September. Swiss, you have also been playing a grindy game on Switch. You have gone back to Octopath Traveler. Is this something you've been picking up, or did you restart your file? Where are you at on Octopath?
No, not restarting. Yeah, it's I still play it. Octopath is kind of my game because it's on the Switch. I can play it in bed. And if we're not like doing a Destiny 2 session or something, and I'm tired, it's the game I can take with me to my room when I go to bed. So the size of the lack of a better term, dungeons, like the areas where you're having to do, random encounters, are perfect for, okay, I can rip through this in 15 or 20 minutes, get to the next town, or, do this mission. So that the pacing is good. And I just really wanted to throw it in there again because, yes, I'm still playing Octopath Traveler. It may only be once a week or once every fortnight, but I'm still chipping away at it. I'm still really enjoying it, and I'm still really hoping that we see more from this team and we see more from Square, in that vein. So
the reason I latched in when I saw this on the list was I was thinking that this was the PC version. Do you think you will only play it on Switch, or do you see yourself also picking it up on PC?
There's no incentive for me really to play it on PC. It's an RPG. It's story based. There's no, like, for you, like going from PC to Xbox, you have different control schemes. You like the story, and you also have different sets of people to play with, like on Destiny. Like for Octopath, none of those apply. So, and I'm cheap. So.
All right, so let's power through some other Switch games here as we wrap up for the night. Agasicles, you have 2 other Switch games on your list. What I'm curious is how much do you feel like you are revisiting them because you want to, and how much are you feeling like you're compelled to give it a fair shake, given that we've talked about Fast RMX before, and you've come back to it, and your history with Yoshi games is a little checkered, at least to say.
Or non-existent, you could say.
Yeah, right. I was trying to think of a floaty, like egg throwing kind of, but I couldn't. So yes,
so we don't have to talk about Fast RMX. Really, the only reason I played that was just I was away on travel over the weekend. The way travel works for me is the wife and kids go, when we're all in the same hotel room, the wife and kids go to sleep, and the kids won't go to sleep if I'm in the room. So I generally like pack up my gaming stuff or laptop or whatever and go sit out in the lobby. Fast RMX I just used to fill time when I had kind of had enough of Yoshi's Crafted World at whatever point of the night. Yoshi's Crafted World I still really, really like. It's just not a game because it's heavy in platforming mechanics, and incredibly thin on story. It's just not something that I necessarily feel like playing for like 2 hours at a time. Sometimes I do, but again, it's one of those, like, if I'm sleepy, it's just not something I'm gonna stick with because it doesn't have that heavy combat orientation that kind of keeps me awake past like 11 o'clock at night.
Yes, I can relate to that. I have played Yoshi's Crafted World. I love the game design. It's there's a lot there in terms of some of its platforming, and it's fun to play co-op, but it is slow paced. It is not an action kind of platformer, or there's not a whole lot of challenging jumps that are going to keep you on the edge of your seat. It is pretty easy to feel like you're dozing off in between levels.
Right. So it's really kind of, for me at best, it's really a Saturday or Sunday morning game, or maybe a Saturday afternoon game. Still a great game. I still really enjoy the puzzles. In this most recent revisit, things that I really like that I kind of cracked the code on, that probably other Nintendo fans more naturally understood, and I didn't, was finally understanding like the costuming progression model, to the point where now I understand why that matters. And
that's a new mechanic for this game. So
yeah.
That idea of adding those costumes, unlocking that, having them having them give you additional armor almost to some degree.
Right. So there was that, and as well as the other things that are in the, I guess, I don't know if they all roll up under like the crafting progression model, but I also finally understood like the flower collection progression model. Again, other people play Mario. I don't play Mario right to collect stars or rings or whatever. But I get when I hit a certain point of the games why like that is important, and that's kind of what I experienced with the flower head thing. And so I did. It was interesting because I did hit like points where you just need to unlock a gate or whatever to go over to the next part of the map, and you fall short on how many of those flower heads that you have, and so I had to go back and like replay certain levels and go, where the heck is like the 15th flower on this level or whatever. So that's not a thing that I do a ton of or a lot, but I I didn't mind having to do some of it in this play. Again, but it just, I could only play so much of it, at a time, and that's why I intermixed it with some fast RMX time, which I may also have to do for Prince of Persia.
There we go. So a game that I can only play so much of, but only because my kids have been playing it nonstop since they picked it up on Friday, is Super Mario Maker 2. So again, finishing out the night with a slew of Switch games. Super Mario Maker 2, it is a nice evolution, at least from what I've played so far, a nice evolution of the Wii U game. I have never seen our Switch screen so greased up and oiled up, and we still have a screen protector, so fortunately it's relatively easy to clean off. But the fact that we're touching the screen more than ever as my kids are building some levels. My one son has finished the story mode, so there is a story mode in this. It really it gives you a, yes, there's a narrative. I don't know that anybody ever comes to a Mario game for its narrative. So it does do a nice job of kind of introducing you to the different kind of genres and not even genres, but kind of time periods, right? Because you get original Mario, you get you get Super Mario Brothers 3, you get Super Mario World, you get New Super Mario Brothers, and then you also end up with the Super Mario Land or the Super Mario 3D World for the Wii U as well. So a number of different kind of tool sets and skins that do a little bit and play around with the mechanics, but there is a ton here. It's been kind of fun to see my son unlock some of the story mode pieces, because you, unlike the first game where you had to progress and do certain things to unlock some of the builds, this is all open from the beginning. But by finishing certain challenges within the story mode, he just finished, and he has a hammer that invokes Mario from Donkey Kong, right, swinging kind of over the top of his head. I've been playing a lot of the endless mode, where it kind of groups together a bunch of levels. Levels can be tagged, so I have some idea whether this is going to be a competitive one, where it's got some type of hook in terms of some type of thing it's trying to communicate. Whether you can have auto run, you can have 2-player levels. The tagging is more limited than the first game. The first game had more tags to it, but hopefully that Nintendo is able to add some additional tags as they go on, as people continue to create. I've had some real stinkers in the randomized pieces that it's grabbing for the endless. But then I've also had some really fun kind of tricky platforming, and also some kind of challenging puzzle ones where I've actually had to put it in front of my son and say, I'm stuck. Help me figure this out. How do I? And he did it right away, and in part because I had forgotten about a mechanic of being able to drop a certain thing without activating it, a POW block that I would always just try to let go of it, and it would activate rather than setting it gently on the floor to allow me to make it a platform. So again, this is only in the first weekend that there are tons of people out there across the world that have really created a lot of good stuff. I know this is a game that I'm going to keep coming back to. I really enjoyed coming back and revisiting the first Mario Maker because of its kind of putting those tools out to other people, seeing what they can create. So it'll be fun to keep coming back to this as well. I don't know that I'll ever maybe invest the time to dig my way through the story, or I'll probably play a little bit of it. But the nice thing about the endless mode or any of these, the ability to just kind of dive in, grab a couple random levels online, and it fits a niche that I think something like Super Mario Run was trying to do, where it was relatively easy to pick up and play. But the diversity, the challenge, the ingenuity here within the tool set that people can create, it provides for a lot more depth and variety. So it's been a lot of fun. Hopefully, I know that I'll be coming back to talk about it more as we go on as well. Gentlemen, we have blown past our normal time. We've got some assignments to talk about as well, since this is our Pickz Playz. We've got one more assignment coming up we got 2 weeks from now. Next week is our deep dive show, so we'll be revisiting the news. This week is a little slow on the news in terms of games with the holiday weekend, although I say that at the same time that we had NVIDIA announce some graphics cards, and we know that AMD is coming out with some additional things next week. So we'll have plenty to talk about, so please stick with us and come back next Tuesday for some of those deep dives as we break down. I'm sure some tech specs and performance pieces are things that we're going to end up talking about as well. Gentlemen, I want to throw out the assignment here for next week. For 2 weeks from now, in the 19th of July, we've got the new Marvel Ultimate Alliance. So coming into our next GX show, we'll be staring down the barrel of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 for the Switch. So I would like to assign us to either go back or to pick something up within a comic property. So whether it's a game that we know that we enjoyed, whether it's one we want to see more of, but to revisit a comic property to get us in the mood for some hack and slash Marvel Ultimate Alliance as well. So I say that as I hear my sons coming back from Spider-Man on opening night. So I'm going to wrap up to hear their praise and my jealousy of missing opening night. But gentlemen, thank you for the show tonight. Any other housekeeping measures here, Agasicles? All right. So for myself, DBQ Hams, not Osiris Prime because he is not here tonight, but Swissguard and Agasicles Samus. This is enough to keep going on the E2KG network. Please make sure to keep us tuned in and keep on going as you play what you want, enjoy what you love, and hopefully have a chance to continue to talk with us along the way as well. Have a good night. We'll see you next week.